What are you guys doing?
Well, we were playing jazz.
So you interrupted us.
So what does jazz have to do with civil rights?
Wait, what is jazz?
If you gotta ask, you'll never know. Textbook would tell you jazz is, and I quote, "a genre of American music that originated in New Orleans circa 1900, characterized by a strong, predominant meter, improvisation, distinctive tone colors, and performance techniques." That definition attempts to put jazz into a box, which is square, and good jazz is certainly not square. Jazz is sometimes called America's classical music, since jazz is the only musical genre to originate entirely in the United States. However, the roots of jazz are traced back to two different continents. Around the turn of the century, as technology was easing transportation and relatively recently freed African Americans began to slowly move north for jobs and other opportunities, their traditional music, originally from Africa but uniquely shaped while working in the field, often in the fields, and often songs about freedom, commonly known as spirituals, began to rub elbows with traditional European-based music, which, with the small exception of a few marches, was the predominant music for white Americans. The swinging and distinctive chords of the traditional spirituals began to be introduced to the rapid lilting piano of the white music. What resulted is known as ragtime. Ragtime soon faded into swing, which was the predominant style of the 1920s. As music became even more heavily influenced by slower, richer-toned African roots, what's known as the blues soon split off of swing. Now, the dominant swing, blues, and jazz artists tended to be African Americans. Artists such as Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and countless others faced discrimination from whites who wanted to hear their music, but didn't like the skin color of those who were crafting it. Some groups, such as the Count Basie Orchestra, which was based out of the Midwest, Kansas City to be exact, faced slightly less of this discrimination, but for others it became what defined how their bands operated. Ellington notably had to share composers' rights and profits with Irving Mills, his publishing agent, who refused to work with Ellington, who was black, unless he got a composer's share. Many bands of all sizes took to carrying at least one white member who could set up gigs, and the club owner might not realize the band was almost entirely black until they had arrived for the gig, and they were the only opportunity for music. Now, many may be thinking, well, that's great and important and all, but prominent music in the 60s was rock, right? Well, yes and no. Blues and blues-based spirituals held on in their pure forms throughout the civil rights movement and continue today, though obviously minus the civil rights aspects. Also, rock is a direct descendant of jazz. The high-speed swing of the 40s melded into bebop with artists like Charlie Parker, and rock and roll in the 50s. Even rock today can trace its roots directly back to jazz, especially through chord structure. This was enormously prominent in the 50s and 60s. A heavy blues influence still draped practically all popular music in the time. Furthermore, music, specifically blues and jazz influenced spirituals, played an immensely important role in the civil rights movement. Many artists used their music and prominence to speak out for civil rights. Many songs were used to keep the movement unified, and the music was used, probably most importantly, as a morale booster. Dr. King said, "Jazz speaks for life. The blues tell the story of life's difficulties. And, if you think for a moment, you realize that they take the hardest realities of life and put them into music, only to come out with some new hope or sense of triumph. This is triumphant music."
Paul, not that I'm doing a crossword or anything, but what is a four-letter word for an improvised musical style that was...
Jazz, you moron.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful lecture on jazz music. Some of the other music from the civil rights movement were gospel and soul-based.
Like We Shall Overcome and Oh Freedom by Joan Baez.
Blacks relied on church communities for support and unity, which added more meaning to the songs and created a faith-based connection to them. A huge motivating force in demonstrations and mass meetings were these songs. They facilitated unity and helped lift spirits and morale. Like Paul said, songs were not meant to be sung alone. They need the backing and unity and fullness of the harmonies, octaves, and dissonance.
Sort of like the movement itself.
As we all know, the civil rights movement started with Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. This began the large backing behind the boycott. Everyone started to join together and sing.
Singing at the Montgomery bus boycott gained momentum in all other phases of the civil rights movement. Even at the start of the sit-in movement, the people at the counter in Woolworths and their followers were influenced by the rush of the music.
They also sang on the Freedom Rides. Since they were on the bus all day, they sang songs to pass the time.
A common song sang during the rides were This Little Light of Mine. Another song that was famous during this time was We Shall Not Be Moved by Mavis Staples. This song talked about how they were like a tree planted by the water and they shall not be moved. Also, many Bob Dylan songs were made famous for their subtle hints at equal rights for blacks. Those include Blowing in the Wind and Only a Pawn in Their Game.
Finally, after being arrested for peaceful protesting, the men and women of all colors sat in jail.
It became a common event to sit while in jail and sing. The guards often threatened to take the mattresses of the peaceful protesters, but even when they did, they kept singing.
The combination of black and white, men and women in jails all around the South partook in this outpouring of song.
Since the development of new musical forms of self-expression, such as jazz, blacks have used music and songs of freedom to influence the ways in which they fought for civil rights. Blacks gathered and sang folk songs together. Martin Luther King said, "Let freedom ring," in his I Have a Dream speech. Clear reference to America the Beautiful. Activists like Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger wrote music in the hopes of provoking pro-civil rights sentiment. And most importantly, blacks made sure that Americans would hear their voices singing for freedom around the country. On August 28, 1963, the date of Martin Luther King's March on Washington, blacks from all over the country gathered and protested the inequality in America while singing songs of freedom. Perhaps most influential among blacks during the civil rights movement was the song We Shall Overcome, a song that rang through the city of Washington, D.C. and the rest of the country, not only on that day, but also throughout the entire civil rights movement. The song itself provided blacks with a great hope by emphasizing the point in time when blacks would eventually overcome the obstacles to freedom and live in harmony with both blacks and whites together.
Yes! I won the William Jennings Bryan pin on eBay! Yes!
That's real cool. In the 1940s, a time of great prosperity for African American music, We Shall Overcome embodied the very principles on which the civil rights movement was based and truly inspired civil rights activists around the country. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson, while addressing Congress, used the phrase in reference to the Bloody Sunday attacks during the march from Selma to Montgomery. People like Joan Baez, Odetta, and Marian Anderson led crowds of people in song just before Martin Luther King delivered his famous and mostly unscripted speech, I Have a Dream. King himself recognized the importance of We Shall Overcome as well as other music as a unifying force for blacks during the civil rights movement. In a different speech, King emphasized the direct impact of the song on both himself and on the movement. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. Now, I join hands often with my students and others behind jail bars singing it. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome. And with this faith, we will go out and adjourn the councils of despair and bring new light into the dark chambers of pessimism, and we will be able to rise from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope. And this will be a great America. And we will be the participants in making it so.
Wait, is she recording you?
Yeah, oh my... So what does jazz have to do with civil rights?
Wait, what is jazz?
Well, if you gotta ask, you'll never know.
Paul, you're not in the shot.
Well, you could have.
Thank you, Paul, for those nice words about jazz music. Now we will actually talk about something related to the civil rights.
Oh, I didn't
Cut.
know what you were saying. A common song sang during the rides were This Little Lad of Mine. Another song that was famous during this time was We Shall Not Be Moved by Mavis Staples. Whoa, that's a hard name to say. Hold on a second.
We shall overcome. No, I mean we shall. Alright.
Or should I stop?
It's like the same.
The swinging rhythms, feel, and distinctive chords of the traditional spirituals began to be introduced to the rapid lilting piano of the white music. What resulted is known as ragtime. What was that for?
It's ragtime. You said it was ragtime.
Ragtime.
That was really nice.
Cut.